but we got to make it a priority. It can't be just on a list of to-do list of things we want to get accomplished. That's number one, a job for everybody in this country and a training system for everybody that doesn't have any skills so that they can get a job. So it's a two-pronged approach. And I've been going around talking about jobs, justice, and peace. We're talking jobs, peace, and justice. Because we've got to have all of these things as we go forward. And let me close just by saying something that's pretty corny. Everybody's got to exercise the ballot. You know, I mean, no matter how worked up you can get and then miss your chance to speak, to have your voice counted, is a mistake. And I urge everybody to participate in the electoral process. And once again, we find ourselves at Central United Methodist Church because this is where we should be for today's honoring and remembering Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the greatest person that influenced my political philosophy in my life. Thank you very much.
And right now we want to do a brief tribute to another fallen leader, Tata Madiba Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, made his transition just this last month. And of course, Mandela was a leader not only of the people of South Africa, not only of the people of the African continent, not only of the black people throughout the world, but all oppressed and freedom-loving people of the world. Nelson Mandela stood for them. He set an example for all of us of persistence, of longevity, of self-sacrifice, and indeed of ultimate political wisdom. And let us have a very warm applause for the spirit and for the legacy of Nelson Mandela, who visited this city in 1900. At the Old Tiger Stadium to welcome Nelson Mandela in 1990, just 4 months after he was released from 27.5 years in prison. Let us honor and let us learn from the legacy of Nelson Mandela. And now we want to sing the national anthem of the Black Liberation Movement of South Africa, Nkosi Sikelel' i-Afrika. Let us stand and sing. Someone who represents a lady who lived in this city for many, many years, who without her efforts and the women of Montgomery, Alabama, there would have been no Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a leader of the civil rights movement. Let's have a warm welcome for Lila Cabbil of the Rosa Parks and Dr. for self-development.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here, and I want to share with you the Parks King connection. I wanted to first speak to the connection that Mrs. Parks had with Nelson Mandela. When he first came here, Mrs. Parks was amongst the delegation that met him at the airport. And he got off the plane, and when he saw Mrs. Parks, the first thing he said was, "Rosa, Rosa Parks, Rosa Parks." He was so delighted to see her. He went past the mayor, he went past everybody else to go speak to Mrs. Parks. And he said that the reason why he did that is that she was an inspiration to him in the movement that he sparked in South Africa. Now that is so important. How many of you all knew that? Yeah, I know you knew that because you were there. Congressman Conyers was right there. So Mrs. Parks has inspired. In fact, in terms of Congressman Conyers' history, Mrs. Parks was connected to him too in terms of getting Martin Luther King to come here to Detroit. Mrs. Parks was very active as an activist. The first point that I'm going to cover is Dr. King and Mrs. Parks were both Christians. They were both people of faith. And their faith and their belief allowed them to act with courage. And the courage that they had in their life, they lived out their divine purpose. And one of the challenges that I want to make today is how we self-assess and how are we living out our purpose. And many of us profess to be a part of the activism community, and that's the second point that I want to raise that they had in common, is that in order to be an activist, you have to take action. You can't sit by and do the spectator role. And right here, right now, Detroit needs more activists rather than spectators. So the challenge in terms of the Parks-King connection is not what you do today, it's what you do tomorrow, the next day, and the next day, and living out the winter that Reverend Rowe just talked about. So you need to make an action plan. First, self-assess, what am I doing? If you're not doing anything, then you're not a part of the anti-racist movement. You're not part of the civil rights movement. If you're just thinking about it or reading about it, that ain't it. Mrs. Parks' act of courage required her to make a sacrifice. And we have to make a sacrifice if we want to see change in this city. Right now, we actually, unfortunately, are living in apartheid. Nelson Mandela took it down in Africa. Who's going to take it down in Detroit and in the United States? So we need a serious self-assessment about what am I doing? Not pointing fingers at anybody else, but what am I doing? It's about you. In this case, it's about you. And the third thing I want to talk about, and that's on this sheet, there's 7 points, but the third one is voting rights. Mrs. Parks was very adamant about voting rights. She was very serious. And the thing that she did that was her life work is that she worked with young people. She established a legacy, the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute. Elaine Steele is here. She's the co-founder of the Institute. So establishing a legacy, it was succession planning. I call it succession planning. The young people who really girded the civil rights movement all over the country, it was young people who girded the civil rights movement. So we have to look at how much gray hair is in the room. Not that I'm against gray hair, but we need to really be carrying young people with us everywhere we go. We need to be lifting up the young people so that they can carry on the legacy that Mrs. Parks, Dr. King established. Dr. King's youth at the time that he started the civil rights movement was significant. He poured his heart into the movement. He made sacrifice that was life-threatening, and his life ended because of his commitment and his continuous advocacy for people who did not have the same resources that he had. So we have to look at where we are and how we're standing in solidarity and how we're using the tools that we have and the power that we have. Mrs. Parks and Dr. King exhibited the power of one. What can one person do? What can one person influence? And many of you sitting in this room have a huge influence. You have the influence over your family. You have the influence within your workplace. You have influence within your church. You have influence within your organization. How are you using that influence to make a difference? We have to wake up in Detroit. We can dream, but we have to wake up and use wisdom. And the wisdom is standing in solidarity. So I invite you to think about the Parks-King connection, the King and Parks connection to Nelson Mandela, and to think about your power as you vote, your power as you act, your power as you learn about the evils of racism, your power as a white person, as a white ally, in terms of fighting racism. We all have power that we need to use. The power of one becomes mighty when it becomes the power of us all. So watch for the spring, as Reverend Rowe talked about the winter, the work of the winter. We have the spring coming up. There's going to be a May Day on May 1st, and we want to see solidarity in Detroit as never before. So we look for your opportunity to be a part of not just an event, but an ongoing change process in terms of how we live our lives. That we live with sacrifice, we live in unity, we live with the humanity that cares about one another and cares about the plight of everybody from the pensioners to the homeless, to the people, the mothers and the young children that are being attacked in terms of economics and how you spend your money. The lesson of the boycott was how money was spent. The boycott was all about economic power, and we have that power. So instead of us making corporations rich, we need to enrich each other. Thank you so much.
Right now, I want to, of course, remind people that here in the city of Detroit, as everyone knows, we're in a protracted struggle against political dictatorship. The political dictatorship that is really emanating from Wall Street. The banks that have destroyed our neighborhoods, they have ensnarled our city into predatory lending as well. And of course, we have been standing up here in the city of Detroit, unlike any other city around the country who are facing financial crises. We have been out in front of the bankruptcy court at every major hearing, and we have been inside the bankruptcy court as well, arguing on behalf of the people of the city of Detroit. And there's an attorney that is here today who is a member of Moratorium Now Coalition, who has been arguing on behalf of retirees, of residents of the city of Detroit. We were able to stop the trial in terms of giving Barclays Bank, Bank of America,